1. Okay.
So, bonjour, hi, and welcome, bienvenue. My name is Liz Campbell. I'm the president of the Canadian Party of Quebec. And we're here today with a special committee for Staying Canadian as well. We've had a very turbulent start of the new year, shall we say. On January 6th, Prime Minister Trudeau resigned and prorogued government. Of all days to pick, January 6th, right? On January 20th, Donald Trump was inaugurated as President of the United States. God help us. And he wants Canada as well. Following that, he started imposing tariffs. He took the tariffs off. He put the tariffs back in. He's taking them off again. I don't know where he is today, whether he's on or off. But anyways. Let's hope that's what he's doing, actually. As well, here at home, tomorrow actually, we're going to find out who the federal Liberal Premier is going to be for the Canadian government. And here at home, we have a by-election in Terrebonne, which is to replace Mr. Fitzgibbon. And some people are still talking about a potential third referendum. All right, so a lot of stuff going on. Let's take a deep breath. Let it out. And let me take you back to the future. All right? Imagine living in a province where you can get the health care you need, when you need it, in the language that you will understand the best. Imagine living in a province where your kids and your grandkids can get educated in the language of their choice without a certificate of eligibility. And that did used to happen, guys. It happened in my days. Now, I realize that's quite a few years ago, but it worked. Imagine living in a province where your language, your culture are respected. Imagine living in a province where neighbors are getting along, no matter what language you speak or where you're from. Does this sound familiar to anybody?
Yeah, sounds wonderful.
Sounds wonderful, yes. But we've been there. We've lived it. Exactly.
Yes, in Manitoba.
Yeah. Well, we used to live in Quebec too. So let me take it one step further. Imagine living in a province where you no longer have to hear about sovereignty or secession, separation. Imagine living in a province where you don't have to worry about your retirement portfolio or the value of your home going down. Imagine living in a province where you don't have separation or sovereignty anxiety and worries. Finally, imagine living in a province where everybody is proud to be part of the Canadian Confederation. This month, we celebrate the Irish and their contribution to the province and the country. Everybody is Irish this month. I am part Irish, and I'm proud to be part Irish. I'm also part Scottish, and I'm proud to be part Scottish. Je suis aussi fière québécoise. Mais avant tout, above all, I'm a proud Canadian. Are you?
Yeah.
And that's what a Canadian is, folks. Multilingual, unilingual, bilingual, from different countries. We are all Canadian, and that's what keeps us together. So I don't want to be American. I certainly don't want Quebec to secede from Canada. I want to remain Canadian. Do you?
Yes. Yes.
And that's what we're here to do today, to talk about remaining Canadian. So the speakers we have with us today, Keith Henderson, Keith is the former leader of the Equality Party. He's also on our board of directors of the Canadian Party of Quebec. And he's our expert on the Staying Canadian movement. Joe
Chanfloni.
I always say Chanafloni, but it's Chanfloni. Is our co-party leader. He's a CFO and consultant in the health industry. He's also one of the founders of the Task Force for Linguistic Policy, who are taking the government's to court over Bill 96.
Yay.
And he's one of the founders of the Canadian Party of Quebec. Joe is a graduate from Harvard and Oxford, and he's trilingual. Murtis Fossey is also co-leader of the Canadian Party of Quebec. She's a clinical psychologist, has her own clinic. She was our candidate in 2022 in the Vincent Arand riding. She is multilingual, and she is our health critic. That's what I was doing. So before I pass the baton on to Keith, I'm going to say one final thing. In 2026, when you vote, think about your vote and think how important it would be to have a federalist-minded party sitting in the National Assembly in Quebec. Thank you. Merci.
Thank you, Liz, and thank you all for coming. Welcome. The theme for this afternoon is Staying Canadian, as well as introducing our two co-leaders to you. And I want to address three major threats to our Staying Canadian. Number one, we all know, comes from south of the border, from President Trump and the tariffs that he's imposing on the country. And we have our answer to it. We're going to be living through some very difficult times, as I'm sure you've heard. And some of our answers are things that we should have done long ago. I won't go through the entire list, but we should have eliminated interprovincial trade barriers a long time ago. And we should have, ever since 2013, there was talk about putting a huge pipeline right across Canada to the East Coast so that we could maximize the sale of our natural resources, and we didn't do anything about it for a dozen years. And maybe now, under this threat, we're going to start taking action. I hope so. For a long time here in our own home province, nationalists were saying, no, we can't have those pipelines, it's terrible, we won't stand for it. Fortunately, it looks as though things are changing, even here in the province of Quebec. Now, 60%, I understand, of the population is in favor of allowing Canada's resources to be sold from the west to the east. So that's a step forward. Obviously, the pipeline hasn't been built. There are a lot of other things we have to do, Buy Canadian, etc., to deal with this threat that's coming from outside our country. I'm not going to concentrate on that, because I think the threat that comes from inside our country is as important or more so. And I want to look at two things. Number one, the threat that comes from the elimination or paralysis of our rights. And we mustn't forget that, because a number of laws have been passed in the province which basically, by the imposition of the notwithstanding clause, paralyze our rights. And I'm going to put forward this radical proposition. You can't be a true free Canadian citizen if you don't have your rights. That's something that our provincial governments of various stripes have not understood. And I think it's fundamental that we attack this problem of the use of the notwithstanding clause as hard as we can. I know this is an issue in front of the courts. And many of us are waiting, well, maybe the courts will look at it and decide in our favor in one way or another. But one element of this argument which many Canadians do not understand or appreciate enough, the notwithstanding clause paralyzes your rights. We all know that. You don't have them anymore. And I'm going to give you a concrete example. Let's say you're a small businessman here in Quebec, and you happen to have been writing internal memos in your company in English. It's perfectly natural to do that. You might be putting them on your computer in English. Under existing law, all it takes is one snitch. And that snitch can be anonymous. You never have to see that snitch's face. Usually when you're attacked, you've got to see who's attacking you. Not under existing Quebec law. That can be an anonymous complaint sent to the language board, who then can come into your company and without a warrant, which is what the normal procedure would be, seize your telephone, your iPhone, your computer, and take you to court and conceivably fine you substantial amounts of money for daring to use the English language in your internal memos. That's how bad the situation has become in our home province. So the use of the notwithstanding clause was imposed so that you wouldn't be able to go to court and say to the courts, excuse me, this language police officer came into my office without a warrant and seized all my phones and all my computers. Under normal circumstances, that would be absolutely unacceptable. Once the notwithstanding clause has been passed, you no longer have the right to resist unreasonable search and seizure. Gone, paralyzed for a 5-year period. Now, it's true. The government has to reimpose the notwithstanding clause every 5 years, which means it's supposed to provoke at least some sort of political debate about whether it should be imposed or not. That's some kind of minor restriction on the power of the government. But the Quebec government reimposed the notwithstanding clause just last year, and there was hardly a peep about it. This was with regard to the elimination of the wearing of religious symbols. The notwithstanding clause was reimposed and nothing was done. It wasn't, and even when the courts examined it, they said, oh, this is a notwithstanding clause. We can't even adjudicate whether your rights were taken away under the use of the notwithstanding clause. And that's exactly what happened. So is there anything on this elimination of your rights, is there anything that can be done? And the answer is yes, there is. The federal government, unbeknownst to a lot of Canadians, has the power of disallowance. What does that mean? It means the federal government can veto any provincial law that it wishes to. It has that constitutional authority. So when the government of Quebec, Ontario, whatever province says, oh, we're imposing the notwithstanding clause, or we're reimposing the notwithstanding clause, the federal government has the power to disallow that, to veto it, and say, no, you don't. You're not allowed to do that. And for a very good reason, because the imposition of the notwithstanding clause puts Canada in violation of its international treaty obligations. So Ottawa has every reason to step forward and say, I'm sorry, you're not allowed to do that. This violates our own agreements internationally, and we're not going to put the country in that embarrassing position. By the way, that's exactly what Australia does. So Canada would not be alone to do such a thing. Conclusion on this score, Canada can do something, but citizens, voters have to put pressure on the federal government to use the power which it does indeed have. That's where people who gather in a room of a Saturday afternoon, that's where you come into play, to put pressure on your own federal government. I don't care what party. to use the power that it possesses in order to prevent the use of the notwithstanding clause to paralyze your rights as a citizen. Now, there are certain Quebec nationalists, they're constitutional experts, and they are of a particular persuasion, who claim that the right to self-determination as a people exists. They claim it for Quebec, but they won't say that a community like the West Island here in Quebec is a people. Okay, I understand that. But we around this table believe that Canadian-minded citizens in Quebec, Canadian-minded citizens, are indeed a people, an internationally recognized Canadian people, and as such already under systematic attack, their rights to their bilingual heritage, their diverse Canadian culture, and their historic institutions must be respected and explicitly protected during and after any secessionist project. We're a people. We're Canadians. We have a passport. And when our rights are attacked, they need to be protected. And the institution that is set up to protect those rights is our own federal government in Ottawa. And we have to put pressure on them to use the powers that that government already possesses. The greatest threat to our right to stay Canadian is the threat, and it's internal again, from the Parti Québécois, still ahead in the polls. There's an election in a year, they may become the government. The threat from the Parti Québécois to hold referendum 3. A referendum on secession, which will take away your Canadian citizenship. Now, cued by the Supreme Court's dismissive reference to the idea of our separating our national existence along what are now provincial boundaries of Quebec, the federal government responded to the threat of secession now 25 years ago. In the year 2000, they passed what's called the Clarity Act. And here's what the Clarity Act, it's a big long act, so it has a lot of words in it. But here's one of the key elements of that act. The Quebec government says, if we win the referendum by 50% plus 1, the whole of Quebec leaves Canada. That's their position. We take all the territory of Quebec. And here's what the federal government answered them 25 years ago. And I'm reading from the law itself, which is fairly clear. No minister of the Crown shall propose a constitutional amendment to effect the secession of a province from Canada unless the Government of Canada has addressed in its negotiations any changes to the borders of the province, the rights, interests, and territorial claims of the Aboriginal peoples of Canada, and the protection of minority rights. Translated into simple language, you vote to secede, the yes wins. We don't negotiate with you unless we negotiate the boundaries of Quebec. That's what the law says. Stated differently, you vote to secede, and we start negotiations with you to partition the province of Quebec. It will be, the boundaries of Quebec will be renegotiated, changed. So if you divide up Canada, you will divide up Quebec. Partition of the province of Quebec is already the law of Canada. That's the point. And we mustn't forget it. It's already the law of Canada. So what's the problem? Well, here's the problem. The Clarity Act is good insofar as it goes a certain direction. But the problem with the Clarity Act is that on the question of partition, the law is actually opaque. And we around this table are demanding more clarity in the Clarity Act. For example, which of Canada's various amending formulas are going to be used to make secession legal? And how will the changes to the borders of the province of Quebec be determined? The Clarity Act says nothing about that. It says that the borders will be renegotiated, but how? And here are some useful and important historical points. Many Canadians are not aware that before a second referendum occurred in 1995, the natives, the Cree specifically, conducted their own referendum. And they asked if the territory of the Crees up in the northern Quebec should go along with a new independent Quebec or should stay with Canada. And they voted 95%, if that's not too high, it was certainly above 90%, to stay in Canada. Note that their referendum occurred before the 95 referendum. They conducted their own referendum amongst their own people, and that was the answer that was given. Whatever the results, we are staying with Canada. The question arises, should we as Canadian people here in Quebec not have the same right? Should our federal government not protect us the way the Cree protected themselves? Because we have no other mechanism apart from our own federal government. That's the only tool we have to protect our rights to stay Canadian in the face of secession. And you can hear the arguments from others who say, oh, well, it's never going to happen. It almost happened in 1995. It came within a whisker of happening. So it would be foolish to think, oh, well, we don't have to worry about these things. We clearly do have to worry about them, and we need to have our federal government step up to the plate and use its powers in order to protect us in what is most fundamental to us, our citizenship and our right to stay members of our own country. One other historical aspect of this which is important, and it's something the federal government knew full well about. In the 1970s, minority French speakers of the canton of German-majority Bern signaled their desire to have a Swiss federal government-supervised referendum on dividing themselves into a new canton. They call them cantons in Switzerland. They're like provinces. So the people in the French minority in Bern said to their own federal government, we don't want to be part of Bern anymore. It's majority German speaking, and we don't feel that our rights as a minority French speaking portion of Bern are fully respected. We want you to divide up the canton into two cantons. And we want you to hold a referendum in order to do that. Now, Swiss law required that 5,000 citizens sign petition to begin the effort, and they got it. On a district-by-district basis, meticulously supervised, the Swiss referendum results determined the boundaries of a new canton, Jura, sworn into existence in 1979. Stéphane Dion, before the Clarity Act was passed, referred to this. He knew full well what had happened in Switzerland. And he said basically to his counterpart in Quebec, a separatist of the day, Jacques Brassard, he said, if you had won, we would have been faced with the same problem and we would not have been prepared. That's what he wrote in a letter in 1997. So that's almost, figure it out, 25 years ago. 25 years ago, he wrote this letter to a Quebec separatist saying, we know about what happened in Switzerland, and we're going to have to do something similar here in the province of Quebec. If you had won, that's what we'd been faced with. The point? We may well be facing, in referendum 3, a victory for the yes. We can't presume that it will be another no. So before there's ever such a referendum, it's the responsibility of Ottawa to protect Canadian-minded people in this province and say to them, what should we do? Where would you prefer to go? Would you prefer to go with the new country of Quebec that's being formed, or would you prefer to stay in Canada? If that question was posed to the natives in 1995 or before, it should be posed to us, and we have to pressure our federal government to do it. One last point. What are we doing? People around this table have sent letters to the leaders of our federal parties demanding exactly this. And we are in the process of working out a petition to the federal government. A petition which all of you can read. We haven't done it yet, but we will soon. All of you will be able to read and sign if you want to remain Canadian and have the federal government conduct a referendum on that basis. We will get that petition going. We won't do it right away because everybody's worried about Trump and tariffs. But in a few months, when our attention is back on the internal threat to our right to stay Canadian, that petition will be up and available for you to read and to sign. Thank you very much.
We'll reserve a time for questions right after the speeches are finished.
Comment.
Okay?
To Mr. Henderson's speech. I think we need to move much quicker than you're proposing, because right now at the National Assembly there is a Bill 84 that's being processed, in which the CAQ is trying to establish the provincial borders as being integral and undividable. They're declaring themselves as a nation state. Quebec is a nation state, and as a nation state, these borders that were established in 1922. Imagine, they're going back to the 1922 border, and for those of you that don't know why it's important in 1922, because in 1923, the federal government gave Labrador to Newfoundland. And so they want to go back to the 1922 borders and take back Labrador as well. So I think that we need to move much faster than your petition, and I'm bringing people's attention to Bill 84, and we do have to speak up and make ourselves heard and known.
We'll have a border argument based on Bill 84, and we have a border argument now with the U.S.
If they
and
pass
Canada.
Bill 84, it'll be that much tougher, because then they'll have created precedents.
Well, let's walk it back.
Right now, there is no precedent.
Let's walk it back 1 second. So Bill 96 introduces for the first time the concept of a nation, which doesn't exist anywhere in Canadian law or Constitution, right?
Well, it actually comes back
Constitution
to
of a nation defined ethnographically. So if you read the first 4 pages. So Bill 84 now, and we've been saying this for years, right? Bill 96 and the fact that the federal government now stables it to the Constitution. I was just in court with them a few months ago, and their own Attorney General shows up to say it's not a unilateral amendment, but supplies Bill 96 with the Constitution document in Canada, right? So this is where we are with the federal government. So they allowed Quebec to effectively declare a way, or find a way, or tolerate a way where they make a unilateral change to the Constitution. That was Bill 96, and then defining the Quebecois people as a nation. Right? So there they won the ability to just redefine the Constitution and get the nation word out there. 84 it's extra dangerous because now they're going to nation state, like it's 1917, it's the League of Nations out there, right? And that there's some validity of an ethnic group having a bordered country. Now actually, international law works the opposite way of that now. I don't think they've clued into the fact that by defining the Quebec nation as just people who speak French publicly and in their homes, and then moving to nation state as an inviolable border, they're actually not on the right side of international law, but they are on the right side of, you know, the poutine we put out in our media and gaining sympathy where it's belligerence. So you're 100% right. This is a very calculated and concerted effort, very devious, genius, right? I mean, the evil genius we like to look at when we look south, right? But the important thing to understand is Quebecers don't support this, right? Anglophones, Francophones, allophones, right? I mean, you start doing the math, where we're talking about 1.5 million people, right? And led by about 50 to 75. So you're right, we need to do things now, but the biggest challenge we have is getting more people like this in a room, activating online. When we're fighting Quebecor, and it's a one-trick pony of a narrative, a nonsense narrative, right? They can't even understand the Canadian identity, and has helped define this province against that. That is what people are brainwashed with. And so we would actually kick it back to you. What do you think we can do to activate people? Because we're with you. We are here. We named this party the Canadian Party years ago, not when it became cool a month ago, for the very simple reason that, as Keith said, there's two layers of threats here. There's a federal government that for decades has abandoned protecting and promoting what it is to be Canadian, has let provincial governments ride roughshod over basic jurisdiction, right? And have never stood up for rights or the Constitution, the supreme document of the country. That's the federal government. I had to sit through court a month ago with the District Attorney of Canada, like literally dithering to try to get out of defending the Constitution. So that's just ingrained, right? It's not a party, it's not a partisan issue. That's a reality. Since the 90s, we have to accept our federal government is not pushing back on anything. That's why healthcare is declining, education, because those are creatures of the province, but they need actually better coordination as a global buyer in Canada. But the federal government doesn't have those sort of courageous stance. And then the second level of threat is the one you're interested in, which is recognizing this and going completely against, I would say, the social evolution of Quebec. It's probably a more cohesive people than we've ever been right now. But in the media, it's the opposite, and the people in the Assemblée Nationale are the opposite. We've got this minority that's basically creating a nonsense framework to unilaterally declare independence. But that's my opinion. It's not the opinion of the Staying Canadian movement, but my opinion would be that if the Parti Québécois was elected next fall, they would rush to a referendum as quick as possible. And even if they didn't get 51%, at 47, they'd probably try to recarve what that means and unilaterally declare independence. Because now they have precedent supported by the Government of Canada that they can just amend the Constitution anytime. And that they can do it using the notwithstanding clause. And no level of government is going to say, hey, a democracy doesn't work without rights. Oh, and by the way, half your legislators have sort of 30-to-1 votes because of the vagaries of our non-electoral or non-democratic voting system. Right? So we're saying the opposite. We want a poll right now, probably like literally poll by poll within Quebec, so that it's on record, one person, one vote. Where do you want to be after such an independent move? And I guarantee you there's a lot of the Francophone population that does not want to be on whatever the Republic of Quebec becomes. So we are all for that, and we're acting, asking for action immediately. The issue is we sent that letter 6 months ago. Do you think we heard anything? No. We've been doing this for 3 years. Do you think the media won't even cover these issues? I mean, Keith sat down with Eastern Ontario Francophones, right, who spoke up. The Association de Francophonie de l'Ontario condemned the Quebec government after meeting with us and really getting into these issues. Did you read that in our press? Did you read that in the Canadian press? Of course not. So this is the problem.
Chance of hearing it on Al Jazeera.
Listen, we almost weren't allowed to use this room today. Okay, everywhere we go, it's a shut off democracy, shut off the conversation ethos. There's all these bills. You haven't heard what's in them, right? Some of this stuff is shocking. How could this be? Because we don't have one party in the provincial legislature that votes against them, right? They all talk about voting against them on the fourth reading or trying to have amendments. But on the first reading, this is how democracy works in other countries that don't start with People's Republic of, right? You read the bill, and then parties debate it so that the public who votes for them can see what's going on. Well, our politicians for the last 15 years have decided democracy works differently in Quebec. Chez nous, what we do is we have unanimous votes on the first reading, and then we go into the back room to see which party can make bills worse. And then if you've been paying attention to people in the legislature right now who are doing media interviews, they'll even come out and say things that 20 years ago we probably would have thought would be crazy. I mean, we have legislators standing up to say, we need to wait for bad laws to cause real harm so that the courts can go and challenge those bad laws. That's we have legislators who make these statements on the radio regularly. Their prime job in a country where the Supreme Court is subordinate to the legislature is to make good laws and to challenge bad laws and to make sure they're debating bad laws on the floor so that your press is carrying it. But we're living in a very different world here, a very different world. We're living in a world where there's one narrative that's tolerated in Quebec. And you all know, if you're on the other side of it, what that's like. And so these are politics of division and identity. And I can guarantee you, sir, that as much as we all face that coercion, I've got a Francophone wife, 4 Francophone kids. I've seen the public school system, it's division. There's a lot going wrong in Quebec for a lot of people, right? And the truth is, no one supports this government, but we only hear from the people that do, and it's all a matter of economic coercion. right? On both sides of these issues, all right? I don't want to call it one language group or the other, both, and our allophones all play together in terms of who can access a job, what do I need to say, what party do I need to direct votes to. So it's a big challenge, but I think we can start right now asking our federal government to protect the only people attacked in Quebec, which are Canadians.
I'd like to introduce Joe, co-leader. Joe, tell us a bit about yourself.
Well, I'm pretty tired right now. For those of you who are up early, we may have seen each other at Cafe Campagne this morning, left around 7:30. Big Costco run, you know, the Village Solange stuff that's going on the weekends. But no, I'm from Montreal, proud Montrealer, proud Quebecer, proud Canadian. I was born in Town Royal. My father had an Italian sports bar in Villemard for 30 years called Bar Roma. I grew up between TMR, Ville Saint Laurent, then finished off high school on the West Island, so I went to St. Thomas there after Marymount and UG. My parents still live in Pointe Claire. My brother grew up there, got a bunch of friends from that area who all now live out here, where many of us have moved in the last 20, 30 years. I live just next door in Saint Lazare, in Saddlebrook. I've got a 2-year-old child who keeps me up and out for breakfast at 7:10. My wife Jocelyn and 4 stepkids who are between 16 and 21 now. We've all been together for the last 13 years. I think as Liz mentioned, I went to college in the States, went to Harvard, studied economics and theoretical math there, then went to business school at Oxford, did my Master of Science there. Had a decent career as a hedge fund manager, switched over into healthcare a few years ago, trying to fix broken systems. Is what I like doing. And yeah, so that's what I do now. I CFO a multi-specialty medical center down in New Mexico. I live here while doing that, and that gives me a lot of independence that a lot of other people in Quebec don't get to enjoy in terms of where my money comes from.
And would you say, given that you've recently moved into the healthcare industry, is that something that's close to your heart in terms of healthcare rights, access rights for Canadians?
So I come from one of these weird, big, sprawling families. So my parents are older, they're 77, they're 87, you know, healthcare is obviously on our mind, but it also meant that with this big family, I grew up, you know, with a lot of older relatives. So in a way, there's a way to tell my growing up story as between the Jewish General Hospital, St. Mary's, you know, LaSalle, whatever, there's a lot of visits. So I've seen how bad the hospital system can be. I've seen how bad the long-term care system can be. I've seen how bad, you know, the disability system can be. So it's always been near to my heart. When I got into sort of investment, I focused on those types of projects, and then kind of full circle a bunch of years later, I've come to directly just try to impact healthcare. And well, Murtis will tell us about her experiences with our system. Let me say this, you know, we criticize the U.S. system a lot. It's not great because it doesn't provide universal coverage. But we are so far behind in Canada. Like we just don't really know what it means to not have primary care physicians for millions and millions of people in this province. And when you roll that picture forward, not just on cost, but on avoidable disease, you know, what countries have been doing for 20 and 30 years, we're not even close to starting the effort. And that's because we have a weak federal government. That's because we don't have data countrywide on all of us. It's because we don't do federal purchasing, right, against drug companies. You know, there are serious lacks of basic good practices in the way we manage healthcare and education in this country. No one talks about those issues because we're pretty busy defending language and doing other really important things.
Yes, and as a Staying Canadian movement and wanting to really mesh well provincially and federally, what do you think would be some places to start? Where could we begin to unify our country, not only poll by poll, but let's say law by law?
So, you know, Murtis has had the misfortune of hearing from me many times, you know, even though I've just recently come to get involved with the party on the public side, that all that matters in Canada is healthcare and education, right? And I think, you know, one of the big things that make us Canadian is believing in the universal provision of what we view as basic rights. Now, the issue is you can do that in a costly way, you can do that in a cost-effective way, you can do that in a successful way, you can do that in a middling way. There are 35 public healthcare systems in the OECD. We have the least performant out of those. We are second in the world in per capita healthcare costs, only to the United States. Okay, so Canada has figured out how to deliver the worst public healthcare system at the highest cost, and then debate whether or not it's better than the United States, which is totally irrelevant given the structure of our system. What's sad about that is because we have the concentrated provincial powers, right? It wouldn't actually take much for us to become a 40 million beneficiary purchaser of drugs globally, right? So now we're dictating costs to drug companies, right? And it wouldn't take much for us to be able to build software on that scale that helps allocate care properly. What does that mean? That means
No more fax machines.
no more fax machines, no more, because we still need 3 nurses to use fax machines for every 1 that treats patients.
That's right.
You, the patient treating nurse, I'd like you to be in Montérégie West this week, and then let's go to Abitibi next week, and whatever this government's come up with the new edition of Santé Quebec. And that, might make sense if you're running private clinics like Biron has, but people who work in the public sector typically are trying to balance having a private salary and doing a public good. And I think all levels of our government are combining to assassinate that, aspiration in any citizen right now.
So how universal is access?
That's the irony of constantly critiquing the United States, right? I mean, the United States, it's not good for chronic care if you don't have insurance, but you've got an emergency room, there's too many, right? They have 5 times oversupply, which is very different than our dynamics. So, you've got an access to an emergency room, you trip over them in the United States, and they have to treat you, right? In Canada, you believe we have healthcare because we have a card in our pocket, but, try to get a surgery, try to get to an MRI machine, try to get a primary care physician or to a clinic in lieu of having that physician. It's, I know it's not easy. I've got a lot of kids. We try to make a lot of appointments. It seems like there's a new tool every 3 weeks or 2 months. None of them work. We've got a lot of different subscriptions, and I can't even reach my own physician right now. So
You have a physician.
I have a physician.
That's a feat in itself.
And it didn't come from using tools,
I
as
didn't
we all know.
Human contacts probably. Right.
Absolutely.
And so that kind of undermines the idea of what universal access really is.
Yeah,
Right?
this
If it's
is-
about who you know, then I guess it's not that universal.
That's the nature of rationing, right?
Yeah.
And I think, Murtis can tell us, there's an important role for government to play in healthcare everywhere. But when government starts to play government in healthcare, as opposed to prioritize patient care and results, it prioritizes instead process and audit. And those things have to exist, but they have to exist in a way that facilitate that, not exist for their own right or for political debate. And unfortunately, we're way in this other camp.
Right, I take a personal anecdotal example in my own clinic. I have someone who comes in who is speaking Spanish, who is seeking asylum, and who can't get seen. And I'm in private practice, and I managed to get this person help. How did I do that? Well, I have contacts who speak Spanish. I have lawyers who can help us draft whatever documents need to be drafted. I'm working with a multidisciplinary, multilingual, multicultural group of people who are looking after that one individual who has a very specific need. And so I think that that's really interesting in terms of how we want to think about what does it mean to provide universal access? Is it one size fits all? Or is it a way of coming together, like Canadians do, because we're tough and bloody-minded? Is it a way of coming together and working together for specific individual needs? What do you think?
I think as you're hinting, right, 75% of the time it's universal access 100% of the time.
Right.
It's as long as you meet the population that is being catered to. And that is our fundamental problem. I'm not sure when that became the purview of the government. Even in the US, right, if there's more than 5% of a population of a certain language, you have to offer care in those services. Which doesn't mean that every person has to be fluent in those languages. It just means you have a method of delivering that care. Call a translator. It's 2025.
You have
Use
access.
ChatGPT.
Exactly.
We could give a pair of meta glasses to every bureaucrat in this province and let them be unilingual and all get along. Right? But we'll never have suggestions like that because we use language as a way, quite frankly, to avoid responsibility for the disaster that is healthcare. The disaster.
I feel like
that
we're
is
afraid to talk about what a disaster it is and to have a real honest conversation about what's missing. Right? We're all so careful to say, oh, no, but we can't have private and we can't do this and we can't do that, but like, what can we do? Because clearly whatever we've been doing today is not working. What are the waiting room rates right now?
I think you're lucky if, well, first let's be open.
Well, I know in mental health, it's 8 months is the average wait. Okay, 8 months. Think about that. If you're like going through a divorce or you're suicidal or something, 8 months you're dead. That's what that means. So I think it's not worth it.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely not worth 57% of your tax bill. Let's put it that way. I think it's one of the biggest struggles we have in this country is people feel like healthcare is free. Healthcare is not free. We in Quebec are paying the highest taxes in North America, next to the Atlantic provinces only. It used to be Mississippi as well, but now just the Atlantic provinces. We are the poorest people in North America with the highest tax rates. And it's very difficult to spend our own money on healthcare. So we are 100% beholden to this system, that we pay into, and we pay a lot for. But what are we getting?
And people, I think, are happy to pay. I think they don't mind as long as they're getting the service that they're looking for. I had an idea about looking to make it a little more transparent and more accessible across provinces as we talk about opening up provincial borders. I feel like this might be a direction in which we could move. What do you think about that? Would that be something that you would see as being useful?
I think it's not just useful, it's necessary, right? I mean, healthcare is a business of scale, right? You want to combine your economics. If we are a country, we need a certain level of mobility and standardization across our systems. It's the same as the interprovincial competition point, right? We shouldn't be creating interoperability between our provinces, right? We should be creating a unified system that works and makes sense, right? And can even start thinking more strategically about resources.
Exactly.
Right? There are small territories that can't afford the right levels of treatment, the right trauma center designation for hospitals. So now there's a lot of paperwork in putting patients across borders, and it happens, but it doesn't happen as fluidly as it should. It doesn't happen the way it
I
could.
think even of the professionals being able to get educated in a certain province and to be able to move into work in another province more quickly, more easily. Why isn't there standardization? And why don't we have retention programs and ideas about what it means to actually educate and form those professionals that will be providing those services? And instead of trying to retain them because we've invested in them, why aren't we all investing and sharing them across borders? I think that might be a solution that I would feel good about. I think we have a question.
Yes, right here.
Listen, always talk about healthcare. It's very interesting, but I feel we're getting away from the main point here. Where are we going to get that petition which we can all sign?
Well, I think this is a great question, and this is all pertinent stuff about what we're here to meet about today. And Staying Canadian is about geographics. Staying Canadian is about healthcare, education. What does it mean to be Canadian? It's not just about borders, although that's important.
Yeah, well, okay, but we're talking an awful lot of time here about healthcare. When I thought the main purpose of coming here, I thought anyway,
Well, you absolutely
was to
are.
talk about
Yes.
threats from the separatists and the nationalists who want us seemingly hive us off into their republic, whether we want to go or not. So
Right.
that's why I'm very interested in this petition. I thought this gentleman had some good point. Why delay it?
Okay, so I think
Let's
Keith can
go.
answer that.
Let's go.
Let me try to answer. Okay, so political parties have to be democratic. They can't just foist things on people. It means they have to turn to their membership to determine what the policies are going to be. And that's one thing that the party intends to do this June. I think I'm correct, it's June. We're going to have a convention where members are invited to participate and debate precisely what you're raising and what was raised by the gentleman just beside you. Should we, as a party, be advocating partition right away, or should it be done in a more gradual, let's say, referendum-based manner? That's a question which we intend to raise in June. And it'll be decided not by people at the top of the party, but by party members. So the quick answer to your question is, in June there will be an opportunity as a member of the party, if you wish to participate, to come out, express your views, vote, and see where we go on the basis of that.
And let me just add, sir, so we're not talking about an online petition, right? We're talking about a parliamentary petition to be sponsored by a sitting member of parliament. Right now, Parliament's pro-rogue, so we can't do this right now. But more importantly, the importance of getting the petition, members signed, and then bringing together people is to make waves in Parliament at that time. So if you're not strategic about when you do it, right?
So will this be a public meeting in a building somewhere?
This is a public meeting. The petition itself will just be a sponsored petition that people can go online and sign. You'll go onto the Parliament's website. You'll sign on that you support the petition, and then that gets presented to Parliament as a petition. So none of this is possible right now, given Parliament's prorogue. But I just want to make that distinction. We're not talking about an online petition. We're talking about an official parliamentary petition.
We'll have to sign in person somewhere. We have to sign in person.
No, you can sign online. You can sign online.
So you're gonna find somebody in the federal government who's gonna support it.
Yes.
Present it.
That's right.
And so you have no idea whether liberals would support it more than conservatives?
No, we know who will support it.
It's important to note that a member of parliament does not actually have to agree with the petition in order to sponsor it. So we're going to make some telephone calls to people who will at least be open to a democratic debate. They may not necessarily agree with the entire petition or even portions of it, but they may say, you know, that's something that should be out there, and I'll agree to sponsor it. So we're hopeful that that'll be
So
the
in
case.
my uneducated opinion, I always thought it would be better at this point to support conservatives, because the Liberal government of Canada has thrown us under the bus so many times. So they're going to be elected by the Western provinces, maybe they'll protect the Indians.
We're not,
I think it's just
today.
important to get a sponsor.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
as long as we get one, it doesn't actually matter, because then it's gonna be heard.
But let's be really clear, though. I mean, we're not here to talk politics today necessarily. We're here to talk about political occurrences. But on the federal level, there's uniformity, right? I mean, every party has decided that they support these laws and are not challenging Quebec, right? I mean, that goes back to Scheer, right? And then even after Scheer, what was the last leader of O'Toole, whose parents left Montreal in the 70s for obvious reasons, right? Same policy, give Quebec what it wants. We're not going to get supported at the federal level until we do it ourselves within Quebec. That's been very clear. So make your decisions fairly as you will, but I wouldn't go one or the other because of that.
Can I just add that we're not going to name names, but we are in touch with various MPs, and some of them have indicated they're sympathetic to what we're trying to do, regardless of party. So this is not a partisan question. I know some people might say, well, all those federal liberals are the same. They're not all the same, and there might be some of them willing to support, but this is not a partisan effort. There's certain conservative members of parliament that would be supportive of what we're trying to do. We just have to suss them out. I was in touch with a former MP just the other day who said he has friends seated in Parliament who are interested in what we're doing. So I don't say that the sponsorship question is a closed door. It isn't. It's an open door.
But I look forward to June, that's all I can say.
So do we.
Good.
Could we take a poll of the people in this room who want partition now, they've had it, they want partition now, or would they wait for 2030 when the referendum happens, and then after that third provincial referendum? Who is for partition now?
That looks to be the majority.
It's about a halfway,
They can, what do you call it, sort of prepare the ground as if this is a perfectly normal thing. thing, aren't they wonderful, and aren't the non-francophone bastards for standing in their way? So the sooner we get our point of view across, I feel it's the better thing to do.
You're not converting us. I fully agree. I think the important thing is to let's think about mechanics. We want the federal government to do a poll, right, across the province. We want those numbers in hand, so it's very clear what a referendum question would be. I think the first thing we need to agree on as parties is that we want immediate, right? And that's not calling for the next action, which is what you do with that deal, right? But I think we could all agree that we want to do that immediately. And then the big internal debate, within the party, and that all of you should be involved in, and I'm happy to take it there as well. Once we have those results, why are we waiting? Why don't we support the referendum? Okay, let's just start speaking the truth that no one does in our media. Quebec is a more coherent place than any of our politicians like to pretend it is. There are millions of Quebecers who support French and English and don't think the existence of one negates the other, or that the support of one means the destruction of the other. So why don't we all just go and do what Quebec was supposed to be, which was a much more harmonious place, than continue to pretend that the tendency of government over the last 50 years, which is unilingual, French only, anti-bilingual, anti-Montreal, why don't we agree that there is philosophically some differences in our population, right? There is an amount of our population that believes that the priority of the education ministry is language, and that the priority of the Minister of Justice is language, and that the priority of the Minister of Transport is language, and that population also democratically deserves representation. Now, what it doesn't deserve is with 30-to-1 votes, 50-to-1 votes against the voting population of the majority of Quebec, to be holding hostage the rest of us who don't believe in government in those ways. We believe in educational success being the actual hallmark of the education ministry working. Same thing for healthcare, same thing for transport, the economy. So, again, not a party view and not a Staying Canadian view, but my personal view would be, I think we need to just have that, adult conversation and recognize that there is an element of our population that is anti-Canadian, right? That is anti-English, that is not looking to get along, that has never looked to create a cohesive country or a cohesive province, and accept that. It's time to have an amicable divorce, right? But not taking our money, not taking our property, not taking our institutions, which is really what's happening now, is a jealousy of institutions, leading to attack after attack after attack. And our institutions are not overfunded, and they're not certainly funded by anyone but us. They're just invested in terms of volunteer work, community effort, the desire to see our institutions succeed. That's not how everyone works.
There's a question right here.
Well, not a question, it's a comment, because you mentioned about an online petition. There's places where people don't go on computers, like some of the seniors' residents, the hospitals. There should be members that go with computers there to explain to people what's going on and get them to sign up from that place. So we don't leave people out from this important sector. It might be minor, but it's still important.
It's not minor, and it's absolutely under consideration. We would certainly be making the ability to vote accessible, whether that's us going there or finding a way to do it, absolutely, yes.
If this is something we're talking about, it seems to me like it should be something, if you're trying to develop a policy for your political party, then you should adopt it as one of your policies, if you're going to do this. Because you're talking about all kinds of things that you have no power over. So what's gonna make somebody think about voting for you in the next provincial election?
Well,
You've not come up with a policy to do these kinds of things.
let me just say, because I'm the head of the policy developing committee that's looking into those things, we have the policy, and it's that policy that we're going to present in June to the convention, so that people, members of the party, we can't just say, oh, well, the committee decided this is the policy. We want a more broad support for what we're trying to do.
I would like to have heard that much earlier in this conversation.
Fair.
So is it in June that you're gonna present this, and then we'll be able to vote and do the referendum shortly thereafter?
Yes.
We hope.
We hope. Let me just say that there are sort of two paths, and we'll have to discuss these paths in June, exactly what we're hearing from you today. Partition now. We want a party that represents the partitioning of Quebec right away. That's not impossible because the Parti Québécois has done that. So we want partitioning Canada now. And their mechanism is a referendum, which they have tried already, we know that. The second point of view is don't go out and argue partition right away. Wait to see if there's, how can I say this, democratic legitimacy for this movement by demanding that the federal government conduct a referendum, and don't agree to partition before the referendum itself is conducted. That's a second possibility to be discussed in June. So those are paths, legitimate, both of them, and we can decide which one we are going to adopt in June. A very important decision.
So if B gets chosen in June, then we wait till 2030?
Well, then
What
you
you're
force
saying?
the federal government, you still push the federal government to do the poll. And then we have a path to the 11th province as a response to any sort of referendum effort versus as our constructed effort. So, you know, again, it all starts with getting the federal government to act, right? That's a big deal here on all levels. And I know we're talking about provincial policies, but like we don't get here if the federal government does its job over the last 10 years and prior, right? So the first part is now that if the window for disallowance is passed, before doing that, they could have sent the bill to the Supreme Court as a reference case, avoided all this. They've all decided to let it take 30 years, let the community die first, right? So first we need to get the federal government to do the poll. And if they refuse to do that, obviously we're going to need to escalate that more, right? And that's probably, you know, a realistic expectation. So we're going to have to fight to be able to even defend ourselves from a referendum or push for our own, because we've got a provincial and a federal government that have completely abandoned it.
Because you can't just do a poll, right? It needs to be recognized.
Yeah.
Right, absolutely. So what are the probabilities that the poll will not be recognized by the federal government in June? Is there a high probability of that?
It's very hard to determine. The federal government isn't, what the federal government is obliged to do under the law is if the petition is accepted and it's online, say for the 3 months, whatever it is, they have a limit. You can't go forever. I think 4 months might be the ultimate limit. Then they are obliged to give an answer. They're not obliged to agree or disagree. They're obliged simply to give an answer to your petition. That's all. That's what the law requires. So it won't mean that the federal government says, oh yes, what a wonderful idea, you have a petition and X number of people have signed it and we're agreeing with it. They might, but they don't have to. They could just say, oh, we note the petition, we're very happy that you participated in the democracy, and we'll get back to you, which is likely what they will answer.
But importantly, it'll raise the issue to every sitting MP in Parliament. And then we'll find the Conservative MPs, the Liberal MPs, everyone else who is, I mean, try to put yourself in the position of someone sitting in Alberta or in BC. Like, what do you know about what's going on in Quebec? Especially given what comes out of Quebec and what the CBC says, right? You don't know what's going on here, or any of this is even possible in your own democracy, right? Like the concept that we live in a rights-free zone in Canada, you know, is probably eluding, let's call it 39.99%, you know, million Canadians out of 40 right now, right? There's very few people who actually understand the severity of where we are relative to any other Western democracy in the world. So we're at least starting to get this into our parliamentarians' heads, which is, you know, you all sit in a very weak democracy, and there's no one here fighting for democracy itself. That's important, because right now, again, at the federal level, we see the same sort of party-whipped voting against things, right? And people will just not want to deal with the Quebec issue.
But
So we got to find our
will they be
individuals.
willing to do that with the problems that we're having with Trump now trying to annex us? I mean, are they gonna say, whoa, you know, we're already.
Well, doesn't that bring it all to a head?
Well, this is.
I mean, so here's what a trade barrier is: a language law, you know, monopolies and you know, permit grants that you can only apply for in a single language, overriding international trademark law, like President Biden warned Quebec we were doing with Bill 96. Like, there's a reason the U.S. government is coming after Quebec hard, right? There's been 10 years of really bad laws. right? They affect the way businesses operate. They affect whether other companies can operate and compete in Quebec, which, by the way, affects whether our businesses are any good, right? We've got the government crowding every industry. Why do you think everything doesn't work? You know, there's no accountability, right? So this is a game of inches and then watershed moments. As Keith was harkening back to 1995, we had, you know, it's not a partisan event, so we won't mention any parties, but we had a federal party in power, just to talk facts, that was suppressing, you know, actual voicing of federalism or pushback on the referendum up until 2 weeks before. I don't think we're dealing with smarter or more strategic thinkers in the legislature now. Let's put it that way. So if we were 2 weeks, kind of 2 weeks to the end last time, I wouldn't expect us to figure it out in time. So there's a need to shake the tree.
Can I just make one additional point? We've already had division of territory in Canada on the basis of a referendum. We tend to forget that the Northwest Territories was divided in two. The Northwest Territories and Nunavut. That happened on the basis of a referendum in the early 1990s.
1995.
That and the referendum that established Nunavut was also partly based on language and culture, because the people of Nunavut, they were Inuit, and they wanted their language and their culture respected with their own government. And the federal government agreed. They allowed it was passed by referendum up north. And the federal government agreed to conduct it and supervise it, much the same way the Swiss federal government supervised the division of the canton of Bern into Jura and Bern. So it isn't just a sort of international history back in Europe. It's happened right here in Canada. So it's perfectly possible for a referendum to be held to divide the province of Quebec.
Good.
It's just a question of how do you get the federal government to care about the best treated minority in Canada as opposed to the Inuit population, when everybody's trying to make restitution to Native peoples, and so they care about it. They don't care about us.
It's an unfortunate truth. They don't care about us. But we've got to appear, if there's a federal election, we have to appear at those debates and raise these questions. You allowed it in Nunavut. Why aren't you considering allowing it in Quebec when there are a whole bunch of people who do not regard what the Quebec government is doing as acceptable or even Canadian? Those are the questions that only voters can raise. And if there's a wellspring, as I hope there would be, then the federal government is going to have a hard time ignoring it.
And there's a lot more on paper now than there's ever been, right? So last time we played this game 3 decades ago, there was a lot of shadow boxing, right? We understood who everybody was externally hard, right? Based on the words being used. Right? Now, again, if you read the first 3 pages of Bill 21, 96, 84, the ethnocentric form of government, the anti-other, the anti-English, all of it is there. It's written, right? So the last time that was written was when we were trying to form Canada, and they had to create, the Constitution to have defenses for what was the Protestant minority at the time against the nationalist French force. Because we've known this. That's actually not even unique in Canada. Right? We're talking about French separatists in Switzerland, the same thing in Belgium. I mean, this is an international reality in politics. So I look forward to confronting it. I think that's the way we have to do it. Is I challenge everyone in this room to really talk to your peers. Talk to Dad. He's talking. Challenge your peers. And more than that, like talk to your kids. Talk to people my age. I'm blown away constantly. I'm 40 years old, and I'm blown away constantly at how detached my entire generation is. And I don't blame them, because when I decided to move back to Quebec, I made that deal with myself. Just don't look at the news, don't look at the politics, and enjoy your family. And then the PQ came into power again, and there's like, oh God. And here we are, 10 years later, right? But we need this, the grassroots community level activation. On our side, what we're trying to do is go around the media, So we have great supporters in the media, and the traditional media is very important for a lot of the current power structures. But we've got, let's call it 30 million Canadians who don't pay any attention to that and don't want to know about it. And honestly, that's good for us, because our job is not to convince current voters to vote differently. It's to bring the rest of Canadians into the vote and start voting for what it is we all believe in, which is not this post-national Canada, but the same Canada that's always been, which is we all come from everywhere.
Maybe Trump should do that for us.
Yeah, well, maybe he can be the rallying call for us to take seriously what we have versus letting a small concerted minority. Exactly.
You know,
You got a voter there, Joe.
I think they don't care about us. That's because the separatists, give them their due, have been very clever at arranging the argument that it's all their side. Their poor persecuted people, the nasty Canadians, don't have any right to tamper with their God-given boundaries, you know? And this is what we're up against. Years and years of separatist dogma taking the centre court. And we're sort of left as sort of bigoted, I don't know, Anglos and non-Francophones who are trying to spoil Quebec for the nice Quebecers. Oh, you know? And this is what we're up against. So that's why I'm really looking forward to June.
It is, and unfortunately, it's not new. That challenge is not new. But we've had 50 years of politicians who cater to it, who instead of saying, you know what, Anglophones are poorer in every single region of Quebec and have been for generations. And when you talk about Mr. Eaton, you try to use the 1% to classify an entire people, you show your ignorance. And when we talk about the Italian population, the Irish population, the Scottish population, who formed the foundation of our Anglophone community now, all abused communities from where they were coming from. None of them helped by either the established English or the established French communities. This is all a history of revisionism and nonsense. But you're right, this has become Québécois dogma. In the same way on Journée des Patriotes, you can't celebrate the Canadian flag. I mean,
Yeah.
what were they for? They were the Parti Canadien. We chose this name for a reason, right? Like, they were the Parti Canadien. Canada became, the effective product of the Patriot movement to move on against French and English nationalism, to become Canadian as a people. That's what they fought for. And here we have, these are actually voted on the floor, that Desjardins basically shouldn't have put that gesture out on Patriot Day. Look, we have a collapse in education, a collapse in understanding. We have a controlled media for a single junta of politicians, right? This is not first world democracy dealings. So we have to fight it on every level. And the first part is here. The next part is online. We need your help. We need your help. We are not an incumbent party. We're not a party that is even allowed in the media anymore. I think the last time the French media covered us was the day of the protest at Dawson, and that's it. They didn't like what they heard because they heard a message of unification. Right? We want an 11th province, not to be an Anglophone bastion of privilege, but to be the bilingual Canada that accepts everybody and takes, quite frankly, the assets we have and our leadership back within Canada. Right? We should be running Canada from where it started, right here, as opposed to the welfare case of the country. And we have the education assets to do it, we have the linguistic assets, we have the economic assets, we have the resource assets. It takes really concerted effort from 3 levels of bad government to make us the poorest place in North America. And I'm really sorry my little guy's talking through all this. This is maybe not the best idea that I had, and my poor wife could have stayed home.
He has a lot to say. He has a lot to say.
Come here, buddy. You want to come see what's happening?
The chip off the old block. He has a lot to say.
Can I ask if you got somewhat of the same kind of response on the West Island when you had a meeting at John Redding? So, is what you're getting here?
Yes.
Yes.
What was his answer?
We had a great response to that meeting. I was at Rockaberry in the West Island 2 Saturdays ago. We met with members of the Pakistani, the Indian, the Muslim community from that meeting. Like, we're trying to build a coalition of what Quebec is, everybody across the board. And this party, one thing we didn't get to talk about today because we're not here necessarily to talk about the party itself, but that goes to a lot of the comments made in this room, is we're based on principles. Right? So, I mean, if you can try to define any other party and what they stand for, go for it. I've done it on CJAD, just basically different shades of nationalism or secularism. But, you know, the idea of our party is that we have a core set of principles, many of which are about rights, and that any policy we'd ever propose needs to respect those principles.
Now, going back to John Rennie, though, obviously there was a snowstorm that night, so we had about 40-odd people in the room, but the live stream was over 2,000 views.
2,800.
2,800, sorry.
Tuned in.
Corrected. So, you know, like we're doing today, we're live streaming our meeting today, and I expect that we'll have the same number of views going on following the meeting. So we're being heard.
So there's no way you can, like, this Bill 34 you're talking about, I don't know.
84 is the new one, yeah, integration.
So there's no way you can get somebody onto, like, CJE radio to talk about it.
Well, I mean, of course, we do all the time. The task force was just talking about it recently. You know, I call in all the time, but you know, that talks to our community. You know, it talks to a lot of our community that actually tend to shoot down newer efforts in our community. Right? We have a problem in our community too. I mean, let's be honest, and I can because I don't care. You know, our establishment makes money here, right? And you know, they, quite frankly, are happy not to rock the boat, and they've not rocked the boat all the way down. All the way down, right? And, you know, it's fine. It's fine because they still have one of their 5 kids living here, and they've satisfied themselves with that. And no one's really fighting for, as Liz was saying, what could Quebec be? This is Canada. This should be the leading economy in Canada.
And yet we get billions of dollars from Alberta. So
We are the
What
l'enfant
it is.
terrible at the federal table for 50 years. 50 years embarrassing ourselves, embarrassing our heritage, embarrassing our ancestors, reversing what they fought for 50 years. And I think that some of us have had enough of just speaking platitudes to nonsense, right? I don't have to kowtow to people for who I am to also support who they are.
You're right.
Yes. Hi, my name is Juliana, and I took care of calling the media, so I spoke to the editor of the Gazette, and Rendell Farrell, and Barrel, yes, and they all want to talk about Trump. So what you outlined, that we have to focus our internal. 30 years ago, Keith Henderson had to speak to Conrad Black. I don't know if you want to tell the story, because we had complete media blackout. We're not experiencing that as much, so we're very happy. And I come here on the weekends, and I would love your support. And if you come and see me later, because we would like to have Joe run. And he's brilliant, and so is Murtis. We all know Colin Standish was 9th generation loyalist. He is no longer our co-leader, but we have to vote in Joe and Murtis officially by our constitution, first week of June, and it's going to be a Saturday in the afternoon, again 2 hours. It's very important that you become delegates. In order for you to be a delegate, you have to be registered member, many of you are, and you have to be, let's say in 2025, paid up for $25, 30 days before. And it would be very important, because this is important dialogue, to get them at least selected in as co-leaders. And do you know what this gentleman was mentioning? You want to talk about staying Canadian. There are 2 issues that we can only handle in June. And it's going to be staying Canadian, because it's going to be a heated debate. I've already called the media to be out there then. We'll see if they show up. And then we'll discuss health, because a lot of folks are worried about health, and both of them are quite experts on it. So it's very important, if you would like to help me on the weekend, do as much as we can to get Joe known, and also Murtis. She's done a terrific job up until now. Okay, so you have to come out June 7th on a Saturday.
An invitation will be sent out to all of the members in any case, showing them where the meeting is being held in Montreal, and the time and the dates, etc.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments?
Maybe online. Yeah.
we have some online questions?
No online question.
Could I ask if anybody, I fumbled over this, it took me a long time. I found a bilingual national anthem, a lot of us are rusty, and I was wondering if we would sing it here in the Legions a little.
Do they still do that in school? Is that
No
It
way.
doesn't happen,
No.
does everybody have
So at no point, our children at no point sing the anthem?
Never. Trust me.
Have you seen, Jean
Which I've done.
Jean, do you have one? You have one, sir?
Oh, you do? Anybody there need one? Okay, yes, you would like one. Now, I don't know if this is gonna work, but I found a bilingual one. Yeah, that's Cynthia's daughter.
This one.
Does everybody have, can you turn on?
It's okay, I've practiced before.
Okay, so we're gonna start. Shall we stand and we have to face, this is protocol. We have to face
There's so many.
There's one recorded here, so you guys are already.
These are all official flag. I'm a military flag.
Canada, our home and native land, through patriot love, in all license command, como se porte bébé, il se porte la croix, ton histoire est une épopée, des plus brillants exploits, bâtis par land, glorious and free. Oh Canada, we stand on guard for thee. Oh Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
Yeah, I had them to rusty because
Yeah, you could.
And I had looked at the lyrics and I forgot a word or two. Yeah.
So what else, are we closing, or does anyone want to talk
Does
about
anybody
anything
have
else?
any other points they want to discuss?
One small thing. I would urge
It's okay, I had it at home, but I thought I had memorized it, but I
to
guess.
say, why don't you speak up for Anglophones? And all I got back was some mush about what a wonderful country we live in. We have the two languages. That's all I got. I didn't get a peep kind of response.
At least
to-
you got a response.
Well, yes, but I got a, I got to put it in my email.
We have yet
But
received.
honestly, I mean, this is how far we've gone in
Yes.
Canada.
Right.
That we always say, oh, well, just bilingual, we're wonderful, Forget about whether the Anglos and the non-Francophones are getting trodden upon by the nationalists and the separatists.
What's bilingual about the unilingual charter of language in Quebec? What is bilingual about
Yeah,
any of these
exactly.
policies?
They've hijacked it, There's only one, I don't know whether this is true or not, but I keep hearing that there's only one official language in Quebec. Is that true? Is there only one official language in Quebec?
For 1.5 million people, it is not only true, it's their religion. So, that's why we need to
Has
work
the
on this.
Quebec government passed a law saying that there's only one official language in Quebec?
Yes.
Well, that's a flagrant slap in the face of anybody.
It has been for almost 50 years, right? That's where it started.
French Canadian, I mean, really, are we all blacks or something?
Whoa.
That we could be totally ignored as people who don't count.
I mean, I think your comment's probably a little misplaced there, but I think I understand what you're trying to say
Yeah.
in terms of like we are being made or turned into an attacked class, second class citizen. And
Best
so,
treated minority.
and there's some good writing on what that word, like that phrase itself, implies about people who say it. It's pretty loaded. Myrna's a psychologist. If you take her out for a beer, I'm sure she can.
No beer needed.
Do you have a question here?
I just had a comment to everybody here in the room. A thing that I do, that I've been doing since I'm 14, actually. So it's been 50 years or so now. So get the vote out. Okay, let me just throw some numbers at you. We're about Anglophones in Quebec. I think we're down to about 2 million. Of that, about 40-ish% of the population votes. So if you're a politician and you're looking at the Anglophone population, you're looking at 8% of the voting public. So the best thing we can do is to get everybody out to vote. Because whether they vote for what you want to vote for or not, they still click that box, Anglophone voting. And then you'll see the population, the politicians start turning their gaze towards, if we become, imagine, because we're 20% of the population, we could be 20% of the voting bloc. Now we get the full attention, because 20% would actually make their government, because remember,
So then our invitation is to you.
yeah, all I've been doing this,
Right.
and I'm telling this to
Fantastic.
everybody. That's
And that's how it works, right?
Make
So
sure
it's,
that we get people out there voting.
And here's more
That's not
numbers,
what they
right?
vote for.
We're 8.5 million in Quebec. Okay, you've got between the votes for the CAP, the Parti Québécois, Quebec Solidaire, like 1.2 million, 1.3 million votes. Okay, so think about that. Think about the polls that show that support for separation are at 30%. Think about what that means. Do you believe that support for separation within the Anglophone community is at 30%? Probably not. The Haitian community, probably not. You know, so the Allophone community, the Anglophone community, that's 3.5 million people right there, right, who believe in multilingual culture, who understand the need for the government to serve its people. And then of the rest of the population, 5 million Francophones, that's where you might see 30% support for a referendum, which happens to be the same 1.5 million people who consume Quebecor and CBC. So like, understand the power of the vote and understand how gerrymandered our system is, right? You know, we've probably got 5 million Quebecers who would love, more than anything, to have a bilingual school system that we could all trust instead of, you know, have to do what we're doing. A province that's officially bilingual. The ability to be unilingual in either language of their choice. The ability to speak whatever they want and their own business, right? I mean, we are not talking about separating for the Anglophones of the West Island, right? We are not talking about being caught up in how we will be criticized in the Gazette, in the media, in the pushback against us by the established parties. Partitionists, just out for the West Island, etc. They support that rhetoric, right? Not about that at all. We're about 5 million Quebecers who are still Canadian. And of the other 3.5 million, probably another half who, if they were given the chance to consume anything else, but effectively hate letters against Canada, would also probably not want to be part of this new Quebec project. So I think that's why, you know, I appreciate what you're saying, sir, and we're going to have to get your number and make sure you volunteer with us, and because we're looking at mail chains, we're looking at creating our own distribution online. You know, it's email, it's newsletters. Like, we can't rely on the direct media channel. We have to build our own distribution, right? And that's what matters, because what we're experiencing now, by the virtue of the fact that literally less than 20% of our population bothers to vote once you whittle it down, is not democracy. And it's not democracy when a party with 35% or 40% of one votes gets 100% of power. And it's not democracy when one MNA represents 3,000 people and another MNA represents 90,000 people. And it's the MNAs who represent 90,000 people who are consistently being ignored.
Also, just as to add to Renee's comment, in the 2022 election in Montreal, 60% of allophones and anglophones did not vote. They did not know where to park their vote. They didn't show up to vote. So we have the government that we have today.
And the way it works in Quebec is votes fund parties.
Yeah.
So when you vote for a party, you give them money every year. Like, if we could actually raise money independently as a party, you would see us everywhere. Important people who would love to donate lots of money to this kind of cause would love to support it. But Quebec has made sure that's impossible. Right? They made sure to establish incumbent parties. You have a $100 contribution limit a year, right? Which speaks to parties that have big fundraising machines and big volunteer groups to go and do that, right? Whereas, when we started, we're 3 of us, then 5, then 7, then 9. And we need to flip that disadvantage to our advantage by creating our own distribution, right? We can do it all online. We don't need to create, it's hard to get people out. Thank you guys so much for coming out on Saturday afternoon. I mean, it's hard to get me to leave my house for more than groceries, right? And I think we're all in that camp nowadays. But the truth is, the other side of that is, if we can connect networks, whether it's mailers, whether it's emails, whether it's Facebook and Instagram, we can actually build better distribution, more reliable distribution.
Go online and like the page, go to Facebook and like the page.
Another question. I'm 70 years old, I don't drive now. So thinking of having kids, would it be possible that through the people going online, maybe we can send money, we could hire a bus, and we could leave in Hudson from the bus, and go to Montreal and the West Island, we could have a parade of buses, that might create some kind of a interest.
These are things to consider. There may even be online voting. I'm sure we'll come up with something so that people can be represented, members especially, obviously.
I'll give you a lift though if you want to go downtown. If we end up
Yeah.
downtown, I'll
We'll
still
figure it out.
push for it to
Carpool.
be closer to here, but.
Or carpool.
Yeah, I think we've seen a bit of a swing in voting attitude around here. Just recently, when they had the English Montreal School Board vote, they were not prepared for the number of people that showed up. And we were there, and we talked to a lot of people that were there. None of them had kids in the system. They were there for the principal. And only for the principal.
Okay, so now this meeting's done, right? This meeting's done.
You tell me, okay.